everybody. Welcome to episode 3 of The Beat. And I'm Rachel Jackson, worship pastor at Sunrise Community Church. And I am here with Cantor Ben Rosner. And we are going to be talking about all the different things happening during this new phase of life with the COVID-19 thing and how it's affected us in our congregations. Welcome, Ben. How you doing?
Great to see you, Rachel. It's wonderful to see you again.
You too. I got to know Ben at a bar mitzvah just last year, which was so much fun. And then we ended up going to the reception afterwards and just chatting because a lot of what we do is the same thing, him and his world and mine. And so we're having a little bit of a cultural, spiritual exchange today about what things look like. But I'd like to start by just mentioning what we do or what we used to do in our worship services and what we are currently doing now. So just for format only initially. So for us, what we used to do is we'd have announcements and then we would have several songs of singing, sometimes a reading in there, then have a time of offering, and then we'd go into another song, and then a message or a sermon, and that would usually have several scripture readings in it as well. And then we'd close out the service with a song or a benediction. And now we've had to cut down from a 70-minute service to a 40-ish minute service online and using other various things. And it's all pre-recorded, and we have an introduction, 2 songs, a much shorter, like an offering idea so people can give online or in other ways. And then we go into a 20 minutes message with a reading and then a benediction at the end. So quite a bit different, especially since we've had to literally cut 30 minutes out of our message. How have things changed for you?
Wow. Well, it's been a long process. Previously, we would do 2 different services. Traditionally, during Shabbat, there are 3 services a day that people worship. So we would have the morning service and the evening service, but we just do one of the 2 latter services during the weekdays. And then on Shabbat, we have a Friday night service and a Saturday morning service. Some places have an afternoon service and an evening service as well if they are more Orthodox. So there's really 3 categories of services that we're doing in general and how they've changed so much. So our weekday services stay pretty much the same. We actually just switched them over to Zoom. And one of the issues that we had, one of the biggest issues that we have something called a mourner's Kaddish for people in a period of mourning of 30 days to 11 months, depending on if it's for a spouse or a parent. The parent is much a longer time. And the mourner's Kaddish you can only do with 10 people, a minyan together. But due to COVID-19, we've been able to, for the first time, meet over Zoom to be able to have that 10 to be able to comfort people in a period of mourning. And we could talk a little bit later about how funerals have changed because I've officiated a couple of those. But on Fridays and Saturdays, on Fridays we have a warm-up with Psalms. It could be any time. 6 p.m., 7:30, depending on when we want to do it. Sometimes we use instruments, sometimes we don't. And then following that is some set liturgy, starting with a call to worship called the Baruch Hu, and then a set liturgy. And on Saturday mornings, while the Friday is probably anywhere from 30 minutes to 60 minutes, our traditional Saturday morning services are 3 hours. And we've had to cut those down quite a bit to about an hour and a half. And for the most part, we haven't been doing biblical readings. Normally they start out with Psalms, and they span a selection of Psalms ending with Psalm 150 to represent that we've committed to saying all the Psalms as a warm-up for the service. Then we have liturgy, and then we have biblical cantillation or chanting, from the Torah, and something from the Haftorah, which is from kings or prophets, and both have different melodies. And then we have more liturgy, and so we've had to cut that down significantly as well.
Thank you for translating some of the definitions into our language over here in the Christian world. One of the words that a lot of people might not understand is Shabbat. Can you explain that?
Oh, of course. From Friday evening till Saturday evening, and we sort of rounded out. It should be 24 hours, but just to be sure, we have an extra bit of an hour overlap from sun setting when it's still bright out, but the sun's pretty close to reaching the point, until 3 stars on Saturday night. We observe the Sabbath.
3 stars. So the sun, the moon plus 3 stars visible. Interesting. Okay. Wow. I didn't know the other part of that. So, so you have a lot of liturgy. I've gone to at that bar mitzvah. I noticed there was a huge amount of music. It was fabulous, and you have such a powerful voice, and it was there was a lot of a comfort in the liturgy. I really enjoyed that. So, can you describe for our watchers what is the thing right behind your head, that image?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, this is our ark, which typically has Torahs in it, and unfortunately, we moved the Torahs because to a more climate-controlled place. The Torahs being the first 5 books of Moses, written on parchment, which is made out of a kosher animal with ink, and it's written with either a reed or a feather, because handwritten, because if we were to use a metal pen, that would represent war, because instruments of war are made out of metal. So in here, this ark holds our Torahs, normally, except during the time of COVID. And this, I think, represents the burning bush, which is from Exodus, when Moses was having his conversation with God and taking off his shoes in front of the holy place. And so is very, very interesting. We have a combination here of the burning bush, and we have some beautiful stained glass, which you saw a little bit earlier. And let's see if I can actually, I'll switch the background temporarily, and you can see some of our stained glass.
Yeah, that's just beautiful. And you can see the stories in it as well, which is really neat.
Absolutely.
That's great. Yeah, and I think your synagogue is just a beautiful synagogue. And so do you have generations of families then there, if you've been there for that many years together?
Yeah, I think there are some founding families here still. And there are families that span, I think, 5 generations at once here.
And where are you from?
Me, I grew up in Chicago. And let's see, a very interesting synagogue I grew up in the south side of Chicago, a place called Hyde Park. And went to school at University of Miami to study guitar, and then traveled around a bit, and then went to seminary to become a cantor in New York City at Jewish Theological Seminary. That's
fantastic. That's awesome. And you play, I know you play a lot more than just guitar.
Guitar is my main instrument. So yeah, classical guitar was my main instrument, and I've also spread out to different forms of guitar, because Jewish music spans styles, not just classical, not just folk, but sometimes you find little hints of times that you could do flamenco, although it's not a flamenco tradition at all. Or sometimes you can do jazz, and sometimes you can sort of add a little blues to it. And so I've had to be much more diverse in my styles. And from that, also with a lot of guitarists, I started playing mandolin and banjo and sort of any other sort of plucked string instrument. I play a little piano, but not as well. And sometimes in services, you'll find me playing harmonica or assorted recorders ranging from bass to the ultra soprano one, the piccolo soprano recorder.
That's awesome. We have of course a lot of musicians at our church tend to do more of the band, drum set, keys, piano, guitar, sometimes electric guitar, mix, couple singers thrown in there. We also have a choir. Do you have a choir in your congregation?
Yeah, tonight I'm actually going to be meeting with my choir. It's a actually most of the people in the choir, actually all of them sound very professional. They read music and they have beautiful voices, and so it's been quite nice working with them. And for me, this upcoming Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, the high holidays coming up in September wouldn't be the same without them. So we're meeting to discuss how we're going to put together a virtual choir. In terms of bands, we have about 24 musicians in our congregation that could participate in a service. And so on Friday nights, but not Saturdays, we put together different ensembles based on sort of a kavanah or intention that we have, or sort of a groove that we want. So, we've had, sort of bluegrass style, or we've had quartets of classical music, or, sort of more Jews and blues type of things.
That's awesome. So we do a lot of styles too in our first service, which we call our classic service. We will do some black gospel, we'll do some classical, we'll do some traditional, and we definitely have some fun with the pop and the rock as well. Little bit of folk, not quite as much folk. Don't do much in the blues world. But yeah, I love doing the different genres. That's one of my favorite things to do is mixing it up. And I sing, or I conduct, or I play keys, or piano. I don't do the guitars. But you and I have a couple people in common.
Yeah, I've been very excited about that. Trevor Brash and Samantha Klein, they were my B'nai Mitzvah students. B'nai Mitzvah is plural for bar and bat mitzvah. And Trevor is a bit younger than Samantha, but both of them have great voices because they've been taught by you.
Oh, well, and you. But I've really loved working with both of them, and shout out to Samantha. She just got into Berkeley, and we're super excited for her. Wow. And Trevor is planning on continuing to help you out in leading, and Samantha, I'm sure, will be when she is in town as well. But they both care greatly for you, and I care greatly for them. So I love having that connection with the students.
Me too.
So super sweet.
Great kids.
So so one of the things that has been challenging for me, just as a really empathetic person, is the fact that the congregation and specifically the choir has really had a hard time, and all the instrumentalists too, just getting together and singing or playing and just being a community. It's been really hard on them. It's been hard on me. We've missed that community. How has it been over in your world with that?
Well, it has been, just specifically talking about the musicians and the choristers, because there's obviously a whole other element of the entire kahal or congregation. Kahal is the Hebrew word for congregation. For our musicians and choir members, I think the choir is used to getting together about this time to rehearse for the holidays, because we don't meet year-round. Mm-hmm. So I think the call tonight will be very comforting, that we can do something together. We have a Zoom call, and we're going to discuss how we're going to go about those virtual choirs. And I've been in contact with assorted audio engineers and video editors to work on the project. The musicians, some of them I've had the chance to use the program called Acapella. And it's been really helpful, but really only limited to the iPhone, and also having the limitations of the iPhone. I just figured out a way to hook up a microphone to my iPhone, but still, it's a little bit lo-fi, but it's been really, really nice. I've made considerable amount of videos for our Friday night services with assorted people that I play with, including, ranging from oud to other guitarists to other singers to clarinet, many different styles. So that's been comforting, but it's very labor intensive. So, a lot of the musicians that I'm used to playing with are sort of, we're all sort of struggling, because we're so used to having that. One in particular who I play with 1 to 2 times a week. We tried a program that's supposed to get rid of the lag from Zoom, and both of us ended up just pretty frustrated. So we may actually try. We have a podium here. I don't know if you could see it.
Yeah.
And then a podium over here.
Uh-huh.
And so we may just try social distancing that way. But singing has been very interesting. I attended a very, very limited meeting that was on Zoom, but then there was, maybe about a dozen people in person in a very, very large social hall. And I pre-recorded the anthems for the meeting, both the national anthem for America and Hatikva for Israel. And I wasn't about to go sing in front of people. The whole congregation as a whole has really stepped up, though. We're making meals for people. The board and assorted people have made phone calls. I think it's about time for another round of phone calls for our 530 families, which is going to be pretty labor intensive, but hope, very worthwhile, just to check up that everyone's doing well. Because we were really planning for, I don't know, I guess when this first started, we were thinking maybe like 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks. We really didn't plan ahead. Even the school that is next to our synagogue, which is a Jewish school, only originally, it's not affiliated with our synagogue, Shalom School. They were planning on closing for 2 weeks, and they've been closed since then. And there's a possibility of them opening in July for my little daughter, who's going to be 4 in August. So, yeah, we're just trying to keep in contact with everyone as best as possible and seeing how everyone's doing. It's really hard to keep in contact and make sure that we can provide the proper support, but we're trying.
Yeah, I love the meals thing too. That's so great, because I know your congregation, like ours, has it's about not too different in size, and we have a lot of older people in our congregation too, and some of them I haven't really been able to get out at all because they're at risk, and that's I mean, everybody's at risk, but they're at more risk. And that's been really hard. So we've had a lot of that rounds of calls as well. We've done our choir. We meet usually like September through half of June. Mm-hmm. And so what we have been doing up until just a couple weeks ago is having Zoom calls all together, but they weren't for singing. They were for connection.
Oh, yeah.
And then we did that with the band as well. And then we finally were able to get the band together for pre-recorded things, social distance on stage. And that was just last week. And that turned out really great. It was great to see everybody. There was about five of us, and we videoed it all up. And I mean, I knew I missed it, but then when I saw everybody, it was like, oh man, I really, really missed it. Yeah. And just being able to play with other musicians and not be recording from home and sending it to other musicians where they recorded it from their house, and then it would get sent to Ian, our media director, and he would put things together, and then it would get sent to our video guy who would do editing on top of that. And I mean, the process, I noticed for us, has been so much more work. it just plus the learning curve, learning huge amounts of programs and applications very, very quickly, just to be able to communicate. And I'm really, really grateful we have these things to use and learn. But it was fast. It was overnight. We hit the ground running because we didn't know how long or what. And our goal, because we had some of us had a feeling it might go for a while. So our goal was that every week we'd try to get better. And then and just keep going along. And that was pretty much where our heads were. Next week we'll do a little bit better than last week. Next week we'll do a little bit better than next week. And that's kind of where we were at. But I've really struggled with the balance between being executive producer of this stuff and as well as being a musician and leading the worship, as well as continuing member care, because usually a big portion of my job is in member care, but going into that production level and supporting the team with whatever I could with that has taken up so many hours that I feel like this other part of my position has not been what I wanted it to be. Have you experienced that as well?
Yeah, it's been very interesting. I feel that all the things that we've learned to do in a certain procedure as professionals and as humans has to be reassessed. And so any sort of basic interaction that I have, just is brand new. And with that, all the applications and all the software and, even just interacting over Zoom. I keep telling myself, by the way, to look at the little green light on my laptop so it looks like I'm looking at the camera and looking at you because, the Zoom and Skype eye contact thing is, very, very different. And so one of the things that was difficult for me at first is I was also sort of acting as technical director, and so operating these Zooms while singing, sometimes while juggling a guitar, and that was so we've gotten quite a bit of people who have stepped up and helped, volunteers and professionals, and our staff has been amazing. And another thing that's been quite interesting, that's another element. Traditionally, Shabbat, we wouldn't really be using computers, keeping the Sabbath.
Right.
And so the way I see it is it's sort of in the spirit of avodah, or like avodah sort of translates as worship, but particularly worship. So it's a type of like worship that you would do, in the old temple. And so, we've had to use and be dependent on computers to lead prayer on the Sabbath. And that's been bizarre for a lot of people, and, sort of a transition. One of the most interesting transitions with that, people who are watching who generally attended in person, and I put the Torahs behind me, and the Torahs are usually that way. I'm pointing towards east because the Ark is generally east facing Jerusalem, and I had the Torahs open, and generally when the Ark is open, everyone faces the Ark and faces east. And everyone sort of turns around. And so I had this picture of the Torahs open, and I was facing the camera because, who wants to have the back of the neck during a Zoom call, turning to Davin sort of, or lead prayer. Davin is like prayer, that there's shuckling. It's like, the whole body moves. So, one attendee of the Zoom service did comment, it's like, are you facing east? Well, it was an image behind me. So, I totally understand that. There was this sort of like shock value that no matter how much you try to be the same, there's just this huge difference of feeling of praying over a computer.
Oh my gosh, I so get you on that one. That's been really challenging for me because I mean, when I'm leading worship, I'm leading in front of a congregation. So when I had my, camera facing me in my living room and I'm leading worship and I have to imagine, all these people with me, joining with me because there wasn't anybody because it's pre-recorded, so that was really, really hard for me. And in our congregation, a lot of us raise our hands when we worship, and just trying to be in this space where that feels natural in that moment. It was almost like I had to go to a place where I was doing personal worship rather than leading worship, but I still had that element of wait, but I am leading. So that was conflicting, and then I know a lot of our congregants, they're watching from their living room, and some are just watching, and but some are singing along, and some are worshiping, and that's been a challenge for a lot of people to sing along with the television. It's like karaoke worship.
Yeah.
That's been tricky. Um, but yeah, it's a lot of changes. But I could see though some of these changes for you are actually um, really big things because it's changed your ordinances or regulations kind of thing. I don't know what you would call those guidelines that you have, and you've had to change your guidelines and modify them because of this, and that must be really hard, especially for some of the congregants. I could imagine that would be really challenging, like using a device on Sabbath.
Yeah, using the device on Sabbath and earlier. Oh, there's one of my microphones. Pardon. Using a device on Sabbath, and then also, as mentioned earlier, the mourner's Kaddish, which is the prayer said for those in a period of mourning for 30 days for a sibling or a loved one, or 11 months for a parent. You know, they need to do that within a minyan, which is 10 adult individuals who have been bar bat mitzvahed. And so, obviously we can't do that now. And the conservative movement of Judaism, I should mention actually that there are different elements, different types of groups of Jews. There's the Reform Jews, conservative Jews, and Orthodox Jews. Orthodox Jews tend to be much more traditionalist, and Reform and conservative in different ways. I know this is overly simplified, are a little bit less traditional, and we also have many different philosophies. So the Orthodox, it's 10 men that are required, and the conservative and Reform, to have a minyan, you need 10 people above 13. And certain prayers, like the call to worship called the Baruch Hu, require 10 people. The mourner's Kaddish, and there's a few more.
Right, and your congregation's conservative. So yeah, I'm not sure even how the Orthodox would be handling all of this right now. That would be very challenging for them, I'm sure. So talking more, I know that our mutual student Samantha lost a grandparent during this time, and she was very concerned about how all that was going to happen with her father mourning and the family mourning. So you said you've led some of these. So how has that gone for you?
Well, so the mourning practices for Jews, generally there's a funeral, and then, for traditionally for Orthodox, for 7 days they have people coming morning and night, bringing some food and doing prayer services. Some families elect not to do all 7 days, and I think that when Samantha's grandfather had passed away, it was before any of the restrictions had started. So I remember the Shiva service, which we did an afternoon. We packed people in their house like sardines. Actually, can I re-say that? We packed We packed people in their house very tightly, and it was very cozy. I like that image a lot better. Uh, Let me say that again. Take three. We packed people.
You were not socially distancing at that point because you didn't need to.
Yeah, and Samantha and I worked up a. This was really something exciting for me. She sang "What a Wonderful World," and I brought my guitar and we put it together. And since then, actually, my daughter Sadie has been singing "What a Wonderful World," every few days, and it's been really. So it was a very meaningful Shiva service also. Having everyone together and be able to, be a part of the family at that time. Shortly after that, there was a funeral that was happening as the restrictions were starting. And so we kind of knew that the restrictions were going to come, but we didn't really know how to do social distancing. So we were shaking hands and sort of keeping distant. And, this was a different funeral. And I remember going to say last rites for this individual who had passed away, and I went into a residence for senior citizens, and I remember that tablet, which had the COVID interviewing questions already, and it was so sudden that they asked those questions, and like the day after the funeral, by the way. Which, no one really knew how to interact. Some people were close, some people were, sort of doing fist bumps or elbow bumps, which is what we do in our congregation, generally anyway. Sometimes, people have done that anyway. And the Shiva that night, I actually said we need to do it over Zoom. So we had some close family members and actually another rabbi who wasn't social distancing yet because the government and people didn't know how bad it was, were there. And I was over Zoom struggling to get it to work with a whole bunch of members of our congregation that were going from person to person telling memories of the person who had passed away. And it turned out to be something very beautiful. And of course, fast forward to another funeral that was about a week and a half ago, and there was 5 people there, and then one of the family members was holding up an iPad, and a whole group of other people were interacting with the funeral and the iPad, and we couldn't take the Jews take shovels, they turn them upside down to bury as a mitzvah, as a caring deed. The person, you can't return that mitzvah. They can't return that mitzvah because they have deceased. So it's an ultimate mitzvah, or ultimate thing to care for. And even a week and a half ago or 2 weeks ago, passing the shovel back and forth seemed pretty risky. So we left the shovels there, and we took our hands and we dug them in the dirt, and we all helped a little, just by taking the dirt and putting it over the grave. And that was something it was a very, very, very different funeral. We didn't have a eulogy. It was very, very short. And the person who had passed away, I had never met, but I knew. I played music with one of the family members, and just the things I learned over the phone about this person, I just wish that we could have done something greater. And so even during the funeral, I said, let's meet up, in a few months and do something, that we can really talk and create a very fair and sweet memorial for this person.
Yeah, I know one of our big things, that probably our biggest thing is Easter services. And our Easter services, it was just right in the middle of everything, and everything just got canceled. And all the music was already being prepared, and that was really hard. And so one of the things we've said is, we're starting to slowly get back on campus. We were allowed to have a certain amount of people in there, but we're still not doing services in a normal way, quote unquote. And that might not happen for a long time. We don't know. So, but when we're actually able to get back and do it like we are used to doing. We're really looking forward to having kind of like a blowout Easter service. It doesn't matter what time of year it is. We're just gonna do it any time of year. And um, but yeah, the special events though, that is tricky. I know with bar mitzvahs, when I went to Trevor's, throwing the candy at the kids is one of those traditions that probably might not be able to happen for a little while, and that kind of thing. And then I know I'm officiating a wedding in September for one of our choir members, and
Wow.
I'm really excited about it. But right now, I mean, it's September. It's going to happen no matter what, but we don't know what's going to happen with that yet. Is it going to be outside? Is there going to be 10 people? Is there, so it's just kind of checking on those little things all the time are tricky. And for us, I know one of the things that's been hard is just making modifications on the fly, because it just feels like from one day to the next, everything changes. Like today, last week they're telling us, yes, you can be in congregations up to 100 for the size of your room, 25%, all that. And then, and we strongly recommend masks, and of course, use hand sanitizer, that kind of thing, 6 feet apart. So we were doing all that for 2 weeks. And then of course, today we find out must wear masks indoors, no matter what. It's the new thing that our governor just said today. So now we're scrambling, making sure we have all of those available, that kind of thing. So, so the changes from day to day have been challenging for us, especially I think people that are not used to it. It's completely. It doesn't have to do with age. It has to do with personality type. Some personalities do fine with change. They're like, okay, let's just run with it. And others are just like, oh my gosh, I can't deal with this anymore. They kind of lose it, And you see those little flare-ups come out. So how have you guys been doing as far as attitudes? And I'm starting to get to nitty-gritty stuff here. People's attitudes, people's the challenges of the loss. I mean, this is truly a loss, a lot of this stuff. And you got your sunny people and you got your not so sunny people. And we've gotten the full gamut over here. We've got the people that have just run with the punches, and we've got the people that are just done. How about over in your world?
My experience has been that I think most people that I know in the congregation are at any given time dealing with it well or not. I think simultaneously everyone has had crashes and everyone has had sort of optimistic points. People I've talked to have all stepped up and tried to be there for one person or another, or a lot of people, and the same people have needed the same support. And so, people that I would call and previous to COVID, and they would be sort of a little bit allergic to the phone for more than 2 minutes. And I don't mean that really negatively. It's just, here's a couple bits of information, phone, no more phone call, and let's just say very, very efficient over the phone. I find myself sometimes talking, half an hour, hour and a half. And it's been really, really sweet to call people and talk with people because, sometimes the interaction that they're used to is so limited that, people really want to connect. And so that's why also, I'm been going through our phone book and seeing who I can call. And it's a slow process because, there's only a few people you can talk to a day, only a certain amount of phone calls.
Mm-hmm. So how long have you been at Mosaic Law now?
I've been here for 7 years. I had a three-year pulpit in Pittsburgh beforehand, and then moved here. Just a truly great community to be a part of, and a dream come true living in California and not having to wear my parka like I did growing up in Chicago when it was negative 40 degrees wind chill.
Any parting words for anyone today, Ben?
I really look forward to meeting everyone in person. And I hope that this brings comfort to everyone. And I hope that we get a chance to congregate in person and be able to shake hands and hug and jam and read poetry together and read liturgy together soon, hopefully for a speedy recovery of all those that are in need of healing and of body and soul, and a speedy recovery to all that ails the world at this point.
It's been a pleasure to get to know you over the last year and a half, but also for others to get to know you through this podcast. I'm with Cantor Ben Rosner from the Mosaic Law Congregation. I'm Rachel Jackson from Sunrise Community Church, and I hope you've enjoyed our episode number 3.
See you soon.
See you soon.